Maze ransomware has gone virtual.
So Ganesh, I understand there's been some developments with the Maze ransomware family. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, Mike, sure. Actually, the Maze ransomware never ceases to amaze any of us, right? They always come up with new tactics within a few weeks' time. Every time they come up with new tactic. I think what they're doing this time is they're going virtual in the sense they're leveraging the virtual box, virtual environment, virtual machines to encrypt the data. How are they doing it? And what happened? Yeah, basically, the Sophos Labs, they found in one of their customers, actually, with this specific strain of Maze ransomware. How did they find out? I think initially this specific Maze ransomware tried using like some sort of Microsoft updater, like it kind of camouflages like it's kind of Windows Update security updater, as well as, and the second time they tried using Google Chrome because on both the occasions it's been thwarted. After some time, I think they took some time, they tweaked a little bit, and what they did is they tried to use actual virtual box as their launching vehicle to basically get into the network. How did they do that? This is not the new, something new. It's been done by some ransomware. Back in May, I talked about at the time Ragnar ransomware, which is one of the first ones to leverage the virtual box environment to use actually encrypting the data. Basically, the similar process, modus operandi with a little bit of tweaks and modifications to how they did in this case. What are the modifications? In case of Ragnar, what they did is they used VirtualBox with Windows XP, which is kind of, I know which is kind of old, but in the case of Maze, what they used is they again using the VirtualBox, but with a version of Windows 7. But there are pros and cons with this one, right? We all know Windows 7 footprint is typically larger than Windows XP. But even though it's typically larger, but it gives much more leverability and actually functionality to the Maze ransomware group. What it is. Basically, I think what they said is with this one, I think at any future time, they can easily incorporate additional malware once they find the victim, if they're going this route of using Windows 7 instead of Windows XP. And not only that malware, it could be another ransomware. They can actually bundle it anytime. Those are the key differences. And some of the key differences would be, I think, in the size of the virtual disk image. I think in the case of Ragnar, it was about 300 MB. In case of Maze, it jumped up to 1.8 gig. I think that's how the big jump is. But the problem with this one is, I think if anybody is any security professional, savvy professional is looking at it, may trigger some sort of alert, right? But they're taking that risk to basically maybe EDR products are not able to distinguish it. They're leveraging on that to basically use it and to use it for additional malware. Why? Because why these ransomwares are going virtual? There could be a couple of reasons, but one of the two key factors I think is typically VMs or virtual root is basically because of most of the endpoint detection is becoming so good at detecting this ransomware. Ransomware. I think they're going virtual. One of the reasons is there may not be same set of security countermeasures available for the virtual environment, right? For example, on a typical Windows environment, there might be AV, there might be EDR protections. Maybe there might be sometimes in a virtual environment when they're doing that shift to virtual environment, these countermeasures should not be in place. I think that's one of the reasons maybe they're trying to leverage, and as well as actually evade the detection by the various anti-malware software. Those are the two things. Why does the Maze ransomware pick up on the Ragnar ransomware? It's because Ragnar ransomware is part of the Maze cartel. I think that's one of the reasons it's easier for them to basically propagate the functionalities they got more bang for the buck. So actually, the research, there are additional details available on the Sophos blog, but this is the most important points I thought, to bring up to the table and take your advice, and any comments on that one. What would be the countermeasures for people?
This is really a challenging scenario here, right? Because you have this image deployed to an endpoint that sets up its entire own machine on your machine that is free of those types of endpoint security controls. And so really, I think that one of your strongest controls against attacks like this is going to be application whitelisting. Because if only specific known good applications are allowed to execute at all on the endpoint, then it's not going to matter necessarily how nested or clever some of these attacks are. The endpoint protection on the targeted machine itself would prevent execution regardless. Very few organizations really leverage application whitelisting today.
So one thing I was trying to figure out, maybe I just missed it, Ganesh, was whether are they expecting VirtualBox to already be installed, or are they installing an instance of it and then running the attack?
Actually, it's any typical ransomware propaganda. I think prior to infecting this specific client or the customer for Sophos, they were in the environment for a few days or maybe a few weeks, and they got the information they needed. Actually, I think, in fact, they accelerated data to a cloud provider in New Zealand or somewhere, cloud data provider, and they actually demanded $15 million as ransom. But fortunately, this specific customer, they didn't pay it, but basically it's a similar modus operandi. I think the problem was leveraging of the VirtualBox environment with the installer itself. They have a couple of installers. I think with that, they have the image for Windows 7 actually within that VDA installer. I think that's the same operation mode, and they are used by actually Ragnar. But the only difference would be in this case Windows XP to Windows 7 differentiation.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I assume based on what you're saying that the reason they went, all they did was upgrade to Windows 7 was because they might be the same group of people, right? Like they're just upgrading their tooling. But what I'm wondering if this kind of attack can expand to use things like, now with Windows having, Windows subsystem for Linux, for example, can they leverage the fact that protections might be bypassed on this separate kernel on your machine, right? Or are now all the antivirus and anti-malware vendors going to have to also be looking for these separate kernels that are running on the operating system to make sure that they're also protected? I'm not sure. It's just interesting that that this kind of attack can be used in different ways, using different types of virtual environments, right?
I think that was one of the most, prominent reasons they went with the different operating system. I guess this is a guesstimation. We did not see how it actually behaved. I think Windows XP at this time, it should not be up and running, right? Probably it will be the first alert anybody will be tripping up. Of course, Windows 7 is also getting long in the tooth, but it doesn't mean it's not there, right? I guess Windows 7, because the surface, the OS has like almost 2 gig worth of software or the data, that can give more room for actually doing lots of things. You can bundle up lots of apps, maybe programs, executables in it. I think, as you said, I think this is start of something new we'll be seeing, which started with the Ragnar. I think it's enhanced a little bit by Maze, unfortunately. But I guess that this is going to be the trend because most of the AV and anti-malware systems are getting good at identifying most of the ransomware and maybe these kind of behaviors. I think when you move into the cloud environment, the protections are not as robust as with most of the companies. There are some companies, they do as good a job as they do with non-virtual environments. So in that sense, I think the attack surface will have more opportunities to stay under the radar undetected for a longer time. I think those are the, most important points they went with this route.
It also points to a trend that we've seen for off and on used, a tactic used, if you will, of using legitimate programs to nefarious ends, right? So if I were to install an actual malicious binary that was unknown, unsigned, those types of things on an endpoint, that's going to trip a lot of flags with modern endpoint solutions. Meanwhile, VirtualBox or other remote administration utilities that are legitimate in purpose and nature, commercially recognizable, installation of these types of things isn't necessarily going to set off those same kinds of flags.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I agree with you 100% there.